Next, let us talk about programming language in general first. What we normally call as computer programming language is a text file of keywords, numbers, symbols, and syntax that is used to tell the processor what to do. So basically, when doing computer programming, what you create is a text file to give instruction to the microprocessor about what to do. That is basically what we mean by computer programming. There are two types of programming language. One is translated. The translated one is the one that the system or the computer simply read the raw text file and execute it directly. But the other one is the compiled programming language. In this case, the text file will be converted into a format that is easier to be read by the system. This process is what we call compilation. But in the Visual Studio IDE that you are going to use, this is normally referred to as building the application. So in the format after compilation, the format is easier to read by the computer. In this case, the speed of execution will be much faster than the translated one. Next, we talk about C programming language in particular. C is one of the languages that is categorized as compiled programming language. It was invented by Dennis Ritchie in 1972, and it was the first programming language that has a small number of keywords, and because of that, many of the feature that the programmer would like to include in the final software has to be included using a library. And normally, this library is provided by a third-party provider. And one special thing about C language is that it has one-to-one mapping to another more lower level programming language we call assembly language. C language has a one-to-one mapping to this lower level assembly language, and because of that, this programming language is a preferred language by electrical and electronics engineers, because oftentimes it is a lot harder to think as assembly language, but rather we would like to think as C language. More about C programming language. This is the minimal, meaning the shortest possible C programming language. This is how it looks like. It will have a line to include a library. This is a standard library, not a third party. The standard I/O, and it will have the only function that is compulsory in C language. We call it main function. This is where the execution starts. And inside, we can call a library function to print something on the screen or on the console in this case. And in this case, we print a hello world. So this is the minimal C code. And C language actually inspired many other languages to follow its style and approach, like its direct successor, C++ itself. Java also following C++, meaning it is following C. The other languages like C#, PHP, JavaScript, and others also follows C style. So next, let us talk about C++ programming language. It is a direct successor of C language, meaning the underlying language that is used to build C++ is actually C language. And then, of course, there will be a substantial new features added to C to become C++, which is the object-oriented programming concept, or OOP. However, C++ approach to object-oriented has numerous criticism due to its ambiguity, loopholes, and many more. And furthermore, in this class, we are not going to cover object-oriented programming in too much detail. We will cover what you need to only use object-oriented framework, not to produce object-oriented classes or object, like if we are offering object-oriented programming. So for that reason, our class will only use object-oriented features in C++ for application only, meaning we are going to use .NET objects so that we can create our GUI program. And we will not be synthesizing any class. Synthesizing new class in object-oriented programming is only for a dedicated OOP course. And next is, of course, we will talk a little bit about Microsoft.NET Framework. This framework is built on object-oriented programming concept. So let us read this. C, C++ are languages that have very small set of keywords. This means they rely on accompanying libraries to provide features to whatever application that you want. Both language, C and C++, do provide standard libraries, but the standard is very small and hardly enough for any substantial programming project. Let alone if you want to create a GUI software, standard library is definitely not enough. And because of that, we will use Microsoft.NET Framework. Later, you will know, you will appreciate what's the meaning of Microsoft.NET Framework. Where do we include it? We will use Microsoft.NET Framework in our program to create GUI software so that this course and our programs will match the most popular operating system used, meaning you should be able to create your own Windows program. There's a note here. Framework is actually a library that is meant for object-oriented system. So sometimes we call .NET library, sometimes we call .NET framework. Both are the same.